Hi, everybody. Welcome to our DH Content Calendar webinar. We are going to wait a little bit to let a few more attendees shuffle in and as we move past noon. So take your time, get comfortable, grab a glass of water or some lunch and settle in.
Yes.
I wonder if anybody recognizes the movie reference. That's the title of our webinar. Let us know in the chat. There aren't any prizes, but we'll give you a thumbs up.
Yeah, we'll make something up.
Yeah, we'll give you a shout out at the end.
Yeah, we'll give them a shout out maybe on social media.
Yeah.
Maybe that should have been one of our poll questions.
Yeah. Yeah, that should be the last and
No Googling, no Googling.
No Googling, right.
That's the main rule. Yeah, no Googling during this. You can enjoy your time any other way, but no Googling.
That's what I always say to my kids. They ask me a question about life or what the meaning of something is, and I'm like, just Google it. I didn't have that when I was your age. I never knew
the tool.
It was called the library.
The encyclopedia.
Oh yeah, we were over at my folks and we're showing them the encyclopedias on the shelf, and they were like, "What are those?"
Right, that's Google, analog version.
Yeah, right.
Stone Age version.
Google before Google.
They were asking me like, "What if they didn't have it in there?" I'm like, it's a good point.
That's a good point.
So I'll give people a couple more minutes. I see we're about halfway, a little less than halfway towards the numbers of the number of registrants for this. So we'll give it a couple more minutes before we dive in. All right.
We're expecting some hecklers in the crowd too, by the way. So
yeah, please let us, as this is the internal version, please please let us know if you have any feedback or any difficulties hearing, or if you have any difficulties seeing us, though maybe that's not a problem for you. Just definitely let us know in the chat if there's anything, or if you have any questions throughout the presentation. All right, we've got, it looks like we've got about half. I think we can, just to make sure that we use everyone's time in the best way, I think we can go ahead and kind of get started on this. And if others are joining a little bit late, they can kind of catch up with us, and we'll have a recorded version of this afterwards for reference. So our presentation today is about how we learn to stop worrying and trust the calendar. Earlier we were asking if anyone got that movie reference. It's kind of a throwback, but I think it's a pretty apt description for this webinar. Really what we want to dive into today is how to construct and execute a viable content calendar to support your digital marketing initiatives. As you probably all know already, I'm Sean O'Brien, Content and Social Media Manager, and joining me today on this webinar are Darren White and Stephen Garner. Tell the people a little bit about yourselves.
Yeah, my name is Darren White. I'm the VP of Client Engagement. I've been with Dean Houston for about 15 years now. I've experience in client services, content, media, and prior to coming to Dean Houston, I was an editor for a group of trade journals for about 10 years, and prior to that, newspapers, and that's my background. Stephen?
Welcome today. I'm glad you can join us. I'm Stephen Garner. I'm the marketing director for Dean Houston, and I've been here for 13 wonderful years. I am the Jedi Knight behind all the mystical marketing creativity, and I just really enjoy the opportunity today to share with you some things that will help you on your content marketing journey.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So before we talk about building out a content calendar, let's answer the basic question first. What is content? I mean, it's a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, creating content, content curators, it revolves around so many different areas, social media, maybe you know of some bloggers that you follow, of some social media influencers, or maybe you follow your favorite company's blog and social updates. There's also, articles, the more traditional publicity types of content where you're pitching or working with a trade or vertical publication. There's so many different kinds of content, and even forums like Reddit or like Pinterest, those areas where you're kind of sharing some insight or sharing creativity. There are so many places for personal use and branded use that you can create, disseminate, and discuss content. So does content matter? I mean, obviously Dean Houston would say yes. We work on it a lot, but don't just take our word for it, and don't just take my word for it as the content and social media manager. These statistics here, just a couple of pick statistics here, show that the majority of marketers and consumers find content to be impactful in some way or another. Specifically, they find it to be impactful in achieving goals as marketers, so increasing engagement and leads, and in impacting buying behavior or brand and purchasing behavior from consumers. 94% of consumers plan to make a purchase from businesses they follow on social networks. So that brings us to our first poll of this session, and I think for a lot of you, working with different customers, different brands, it's always going to be kind of different how you plan and attack content. So we'd like to ask first, where is your content strategy, if any, mapped out? We'll give you a couple minutes to answer this question. So a few of the different areas, I mean, it can come from a content calendar, kind of like we're talking about today, or maybe you just have a group of Post-it notes or a piece of paper that you put down topics. I don't know how for Stephen and Darren, who have been here a little bit longer than me, I don't know how clients or customers used to do it, or how they used to keep track of these ideas. What were some of the ways? Was it kind of an email chain back and forth? What did you guys see?
Yeah, well, back in the olden days, Sean, no, just
BC.
back before content. No, yeah, it would be more reactionary. A lot of thought leadership type pieces, feature articles, but it wouldn't be utilized in multiple forms. That's a nice thing about today's world that we live in. There's so many different ways to use it: lead gen, social media, earned and owned, and all the above. So a lot of times, yeah, it was kind of reactionary, where you'd have some opportunity and you take advantage of that opportunity. So it's definitely changed. It's definitely more proactive now.
Yeah, and I think as we see, a majority of our attendees have voted here, so we can kind of close and review these results here. Okay, so this is a great thing to see. 67% say content calendar, and 22% take that a step deeper and say marketing strategy. So that's a wonderful thing to see as we kind of move into this. It's a great place to start, and that's a great place to be, where you're taking content into consideration from the very beginning and really attacking it proactively.
Yeah, and Sean, if everybody's been paying attention in those internal Dean Houston meetings, um, you know, prior to a couple weeks ago, we should have all answered nowhere because Dean Houston did not have, a content strategy mapped out. It was just nowhere. And now we do have a content calendar, so, and a marketing strategy that's in the process of being created. So it's spot on to see those answers there, at least for Dean Houston internally. If you're asking the internal folks, where do we have our Dean Houston, content strategy mapped out? So that makes sense.
Yeah, we
I
got it
think
done just in time for this webinar.
Exactly.
I think going back to that question though that you asked, how was it done BC before content marketing officially was coined? It was there. I think there are a couple of things to take into consideration. One, we didn't have the mechanism to deploy the content digitally. Okay, that's the first thing. So the organization of the different pieces of content wasn't the way it is now back then. You had events, you had outbound, obviously, you had one-to-one contact with sales, you had catalogs, you had different modes depending on their go-to-market strategy. And so I think back in the day, the organization and the rationalization that we have due to technology has changed the way we look at the value of content because it plays an integral role on influencing the sale ultimately.
Yeah, very well said, Stephen. And I think that kind of sets us up for our next discussion, the next part of this, which is, so we've kind of talked about, if content matters and what it is exactly, but are people really using it? I mean, marketers say it's important, consumers say they pay attention to it, but our customers, our clients, our brands, different organizations, are they really making sure that this content matters? And I think a big part of that is making sure that strategy plays a key role in that. When we look at this breakdown, again, people are out there, they're actively creating content. Marketers are out there doing this. 94% using social media, 77% saying they have some kind of content strategy, though, like we talked about it could just be a list of topics or something a little bit more, a little bit more elementary. But the big glaring statistic there is only 40% say content marketing is an important piece of overall strategy. And I think even though content hasn't traditionally had a central place in marketing strategy, a big problem with that is that even if you're staying consistent with social media, blog posting, publicity, you can kind of fall into a trap of haphazard thinking.
So the value of having a strategy in this context is the reality of it is that users are accessing the different communication platforms to understand the value of a brand. Does it align with them? Does it help them in their need? And so the strategy is saying we're going to put together a plan to help connect the dots. We're going to connect with the user. We're going to help them make decisions. We're going to influence their buying behavior. So that's what the strategy is really saying. And we're going to leverage those communication touch points that are consumed by the user who is basically saying in the marketplace, hey, help me, educate me on this. And so strategy is something that's critical when you have a purpose to serve your customer who is using these different media and communication outlets to really understand how you can help them. And that's why you don't want to minimize the value of crafting a strategy, because really you're thinking not just about your brand, but you're also thinking about the customer who is, patronizing your company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think kind of setting this up here too, we've talked about how there is a lot of back end work to be done with content and how it should be integrated from an early stage. But another issue is kind of at the tail end of content. Do brands understand if it's for them or not? And our resounding answer is yes. Obviously, I'm a big believer in content, but content doesn't just have to be cool social media posts or Facebook Live events or live blogging or something like that. Even if you think that your brand is a little too niche or too technical or in a really specific market, you can still utilize content. It really just depends on what the topics are and what the platforms are. And I think we're really starting to see this become more popular among even business to business brands who are a little bit late to the party or becoming later adopters of content, where we're seeing, as of 2018, 37% of B2B marketers said they had a documented content strategy. And I'm sure that that has grown over the last few years as well.
Yeah, so and that's it. I like the question you asked, like, is it for me or not? Well, you know, you have to ask the question relative to the consumer. Is it for them? Because B2B marketers historically, they would tout the value of their brand and service because they looked at it from their perspective. Okay, but nowadays, the power of social media and other digital communication platforms, the value of a brand is evaluated from the consumer's perspective. So now the question needs to be, is it for them? Okay, right? And so you have to think about what their needs are. And so that's the difference. And so when you see companies that don't understand whether or not they should be utilizing it, they're not looking at it from the perspective in the 21st century, which is basically the customer's point of view.
Yeah. And I think it's even more prevalent, or should be more prevalent, in B2B, because a lot of times when you're buying a product, if it's a technical product or a piece of equipment or something that's a little more difficult to understand versus like a bag of M&Ms or something like that on the consumer side, you need that education, you need that content, you need to consume it and educate yourself on it before you feel comfortable making that purchase.
Yeah, I think to kind of tie a little bow around that, I think it's really about content does fit all, but it's not necessarily a one size fits all proposition. And so when you're trying to build out content, once you've decided it's for you, you've decided it matters to your organization, you've come to that conclusion and you're ready to, start producing and start seeing results from content. One of the biggest things is that you need to start with is, where do you pull that content? Where do you get those topics? Is it a crumpled up list? Where is it coming from? Your strategy? How is it informed? Where is it coming from? And one of the easiest places to start is you working with your marketing team. You kind of know in general what your big industry events are, if there are any trade shows or maybe any product launches or your rebranding. There are usually a couple of tentpole initiatives throughout the year that you can rely on to provide some content. But if you're only posting a few times a quarter, or maybe you're only posting around events, people aren't really going to be on the lookout for what you're doing. So a big challenge beyond that, beyond finding just your big tentpole topics, is figuring out how to fill in those gaps and how to make that relevant.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges for an ongoing, content strategy is filling those holes. And a lot of times you can curate content from several other sources. There's a lot of bloggers out there right now. There's the the trade media that are in your markets. Trade media is a great place to to find trending news topics that maybe relate to your category, and curate that and kind of put your own spin on it. That's a great way to kind of continue that elevated exposure on the content side. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities out there, and I just mentioned a couple, but there are many for sure.
And I think too, the really important thing is, again, it all should be customer centric. So
Right.
B2B companies that are delivering a great customer experience, they solve the problem for the customer. That's a narrative that needs to be transformed into the many forms of content, because what you're doing is validating your brand promise to that customer. So sometimes the process of unearthing, content that's out there is looking from within and looking from without simultaneously, and really connecting the dots, like, what was the customer's experience? And like Darren said, then you see industry trends and you align all of those with the value of your brand proposition through those narratives.
Yeah, Stephen, I think that's a really good point about creating valuable content, creating content that's useful to forwarding the brand message, and then also, providing some value and some information for your audience. So really the next question is, where do you put this content? Once you have some great topics and you're starting to put together maybe some testimonials, maybe some educational videos, whatever your content load looks like, based on what your organization does and your industry and maybe where your where your customer base or where your stakeholder base is, you're going to want to make sure you have a good, robust mix of content channels that you're using. And as with any kind of digital marketing tool, a lot of this can boil down to trial and error, though you can definitely make more educated choices here. So, for example, if you're working in the B2B space and you want to make sure that you're staying on top of topics relevant to your sales channel or distributors, using LinkedIn is a great tool. That's where a lot of those conversations happen. Say you're a consumer brand that creates automotive parts, and you have big enthusiast communities on something like Reddit. You can go ahead and share stories and use your expertise in that market to contribute to the overall enthusiast conversations around that. And then obviously you can create content through the channels that you own as well. It doesn't have to just be through social networks. You can use email marketing, and you can use blogs, newsletters that you send out to a certain list of people that that you've curated over the years, and really make sure you're hitting those key markets. But again, I think it comes back to having a nice, robust mix. You shouldn't rely on any one channel to deliver all your results.
And I think too, it's specific to your industry as well. Darren brought up a point prior to this, is that so in the B2B industrial space, one of the critical things is understanding the value of the technology. So decision makers like purchasers, owner operators, who is trying to decide whether or not I should adopt this new technology, okay, or adopt the technology that has been in the market for some time. A video tells a story that helps them to understand what are those unique features and benefits, right, in a most concise way. So you have to align the different types of content channels to the needs of your industry, right? That's really critical. So an organization have to have a tailored suit, based on your body type, right? And so the same thing applies here. You want to tailor it based on the industry type, and having a variety that's going to reach that audience in multiple ways effectively. That's the key, effectively, because you don't want to have a TikTok account with people twerking, and it doesn't reach your audience, right? You want to have something that's going to really
may reach some kind of audience.
It may not reach the audience that you want, but so you get the point there. So it's relative to the customer, but it's also relative to your industry based on what your communication objectives are.
Yeah, and before we've done a lot of talking about how to create content, where to pull topics from, where you should be launching it, and we haven't done too much diving into the actual calendar itself. But before we get into that aspect of it, kind of the crux of what this webinar is really all about, we're going to have another poll, and it kind of ties into where you're putting your content. So you can answer this from a Dean Houston perspective, or maybe a personal perspective, or maybe some of the different brands and customers that you work with. But where are you currently disseminating content? What do you use? Are you kind of a social media only person? Are you relying on website updates like news stories or blogs? Are you sending out email communications? Maybe you employ a regular email newsletter, or are you kind of going the traditional route and talking to trade journals, pitching them stories, maybe working on collaborative pieces? And obviously that's been a big piece of the B2B marketing industry forever and continues to be. So looks like we're starting to get some results. I'll give you about another minute to respond here. But yeah, there's so many different outlets, and like we said, really it's best to have a multi-pronged approach. All right, it looks like we got a majority of the responses here, so I'll I'll close the poll and kind of show you what we're looking at. So really, again, most people had the correct answer here, which is 2 or more of the above. You should be hitting all these channels, not just because they all have their own merits, but it's good to be in places where marketing is starting to emerge. You want to be on the cutting edge. You want to be on the side of innovation. So pushing, B2B marketing, or even pushing agency marketing more so to social media and website content is really a big transition now. And then obviously email will continue to be a huge piece of marketing, especially as we've all noticed during during COVID times. We've gotten so many emails about in these unprecedented times, or people and companies trying to reassure us, how they're taking care of us or looking out for us. So really good answers here. I would, if this was a quiz and not a poll, I'd say you're all getting pretty high marks so far. And now we can dive into the actual calendar itself. So some of you might be familiar with this Outlook. Some of you may have helped us put this together or put this particular one together, but this is just an example of what a content calendar can look like and kind of how we break it down. Looking into, starting out with what the campaign is, what type of product or industry are we going after? What channels or tactics are we using? So how does it break down from a web perspective, a social media perspective? Are we taking out any paid ads digitally or in traditional trade press? And what kind of collateral are we creating to go along with this? So maybe are there any new regulatory brochures, or especially in a B2B like industrial setting, you'll see a lot of regulatory brochures or new product brochures. Really, Darren and Stephen kind of helped me to craft this piece together, kind of joining my expertise for scheduling content out with kind of what what a customer or what a brand would want to see and how they would want it to be laid out to better understand it.
Yeah, so a content calendar is a visual representation of the battle plan. It's basically the direction we want to go. And in the world of agile marketing, it is not something that's stagnant. It's a living document. It helps us to say, this is what we want to do. Now, there are opportunities in the market, such as trends or innovation, or even a threat from the competition that allows us to adjust on the fly. So this is like the commander's intent, so to speak. We know what we want to achieve. And it helps align all the players who are participating in this, because this is a collaborative process to see, this is our visual roadmap to where we want to go. These are the things we want to deploy. And it also helps them to think, as we collaborate, of more ideas that are relevant to our strategic communication objectives.
Mm-hmm. And I, just one bit of advice here too is you don't have to start with a very big, complicated, calendar. You can start small and add to it. A lot of times it's better to kind of start simple, focused, and then build as you go. Because if you try to do everything, right out of the gate, it can overwhelm you. And the other, my other piece of advice on a content effort in general and the calendar, don't start and stop. If you start it, you got to commit to it, you got to stick with it. And that's why I think you start small, because if you do get overwhelmed and you don't hit some of your your deadlines and you aren't as consistent, then you can kind of stay small or stay within what you think you can accomplish. So I think those are.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Darren. I mean, I like what you said, is being consistent, because the reality of it is that we want to evaluate the effectiveness of our content, right? And so the consistent amount of impressions, the consistent amount of deployment of communications through our various channels is going to help serve as a baseline as we look at the KPIs and see, is it doing what we want it to do? Can we adjust? Or say it's your first time and you don't know what it should do. Consistency is the key. Even if you say, man, this is doing horribly, okay, well, you had to be consistent to know that. If you start and stop, you won't get any data. So, and this not data that's meaningful over the period of time. And plus, if you make a significant investment in your content calendar, and you deploy the content, you want to see the ROI over the period of time. So that's a really good point, Darren.
Yeah, and I think Darren also makes a good point about, consistency and setting expectations that are going to help you stay consistent. So you want to start, from a realistic place and build from there. So think about how much of a content load your current team can handle. So you've got a plan in place with your calendar, but aligning your team is kind of the next step. So you have the plan, you've got the items set, you're going to write a blog for September about the specific benefits of this specific product, and or maybe the benefits of using a product in the specific application. But you really want to know how much capacity your team has, so you're not already overwhelmed out of the gate. So be aspirational, make sure you're trying to create content that's going to hit on the most relevant topics and the greatest number of topics, especially those that are relevant as possible. But you don't want to give your team something that is completely out of the realm of possibility, and you definitely don't want to give them something that that they can't complete. And the responsibility of building out content and creating ideas is not just on the marketing department or the team that's creating content specifically. So it's kind of on everybody. Though the content team should be the ones facilitating it and really starting that discussion. They should be able to go to technical staff, to people who are subject matter experts, and kind of get their opinions to help build out a more robust, a more full slate of topics.
Yeah, so there are 2 points here, and I like this visual, first of all, because it really shows you truly how the content will keep spinning. There are individuals who are playing a critical part in developing those narratives that are going to be communicated in different forms. That's number one. And then this is also about goal setting, right? The point that you made about being aspirational is like, okay, we want to hit the sky, right? Because you do want to grow, right? You want to grow, but say you don't hit that target. But what that tells you, you adjust. You learn some things from that experience. If you set the bar too low, you won't get the impact that you're looking for. So you don't want to be fearful in this process, especially if it's new to you, but you also want to be, as you stated, Sean, aware of your capacity. And a great thing about using multiple people is that it creates a force multiplier where you have several people who contribute, several key people, and I say that, not the whole world, and instead of one person having to own it. Now I get it, sometimes some companies have, only, maybe 1 or 2 people. We like to kill Sean, but the reality of it is we work together collectively to help form those content pieces.
Yeah, and again, sorry, you have to work with the resources you have, and maybe that's adding a couple of responsibilities among a wider group of people rather than hiring one content person at first. Just whatever is realistic for your organization is really the best way to go about it.
Yeah, and just like a couple examples, what you guys are talking about, like how do you find ideas, how do you extend the team? Everybody has a different route to market. Maybe they use a sales team, maybe they have channel partners like distributors or reps or something like that. You can engage those folks once you get the plan set up and you have some early wins. They can give you new perspective, different perspective from the field, and anyone can be a supplier of information. For example, a few years ago we had a client that had a factory worker that saw something happen on a TV show he was watching, and it literally turned into one of their biggest campaigns after we were able to identify that, yes, that was their equipment being used on that TV show. And talk about a lift. I mean, when you engage other people that normally aren't in charge of marketing or have any input in that, I mean, it just gets passed throughout the whole organization. So if you can extend it, it's very beneficial.
Yeah, And not to belabor the point, but when you get those people involved, they become great advocates for the brand as well, and then they feel like their voice is heard in the overall plan and culture of the company as well. So a lot of byproducts there and a lot of different benefits. So with that, with kind of setting the bar, figuring out how much content you want to create and you're able to create, we'll launch our next poll, which is who is dedicated to content in your company? And we didn't put Sean as a response here. But this may not be as as applicable to DH directly, because obviously a lot of what we do is internal, even though we do work with some contractors. But just in your experience, or maybe any other places you've worked with, or clients or customers that you continue to work with, what do you see in terms of who's responsible for those things? Does their internal department their internal marketing department play a part in that? Do they rely on the external agency to do that for them, or contractors? Or maybe they just have an intern who is dedicated to throwing up a couple of social posts, and that's kind of all the bandwidth that they have in terms of content. Or in the worst case scenario, and this is a place to build from, maybe they don't have anyone who's dedicated to content, and that way they can kind of spread the responsibility among their marketing department and start to create the need for a content specific role. So I'll let everybody vote here, gather a couple more responses. All right, it looks like we've got most everybody replying here. So I'll go ahead and close, share those with you, share what everybody said. So internal department, I guess that could refer to a DH or with the groups that we work with. They kind of rely on an internal department to kind of come up with initiatives, come up with strategies and content execution. An external agency and no one yet are kind of divided. There's the lower percentage answers, but obviously for us that's a little bit more of a complicated question, as we are generally the ones who are kind of dedicated to the content. But it is good when working with clients or customers to really make sure that you're driving home the importance of getting their team involved in the content and making sure that they feel like they have a voice. Once you've delegated some of the responsibilities and figured out who in the team can handle the load for the content production, it's good to kind of set up some, a hierarchy, set up some order and roles. So you have your team, you've kind of identified the people who might be able to help and how much they might be able to help with. And then you kind of set due dates with the content calendar, and you're making sure that everybody's staying honest. And even if you're not able to keep up directly with it, maybe you're not able to produce all the pieces at the exact time that you said you'd be able to, but you're at least keeping everybody honest and making sure they are aware of what expectations are. One of the most important roles within the content team, though, is making sure there's someone who's a manager and a delegator, so that when it comes time to get something done or comes time to enforce a due date, nobody's looking around and kind of pointing at each other and saying, wait, were you supposed to do that? Were you supposed to handle? Because if you don't have a content structure, it's something that can kind of easily get pushed to the side with other, with other pressing matters or client crises.
So a key point of this is that you need to have someone who owns the strategic vision. You see the visual of the person looking at all the pieces of the content, because what you have to think about is the mental picture that's going to be created by the content that's being deployed in the mind of the consumer. That's super critical. So this is not a spray and pray approach and seeing what sticks. This is about, okay, who owns that part, most importantly? And then secondly, then as Sean mentioned, logistically, how it's deployed and how it's going to impact them. So that's really key. So when you're working with your customer or your team members, you do want to go big and then small, and then thinking about the impact. So prophetically, you're looking at the effect, and then you're thinking about how do I craft something in advance of affecting the consumer in a positive way.
Yeah, and as far as identifying the team, I think it's critical to kind of spread it out and have different, departments within the company. I don't know if you already mentioned that, Sean, or not. Apologize if I'm repeating myself, but I do think it's important to not have it be solely on the marketing team, engineering, sales, distributors, everybody, even HR and the factory, like I mentioned. But it's also super important to get a cadence going. A lot of times early on, when we would start to put together a content strategy and a plan and start to, put in the work on it, we'll meet more often, more frequently early on. And then once we get it kind of going, then we'll kind of peel back a little bit, and it kind of almost runs on, on cruise control. So those are a couple important keys, I think, to how to get it going.
You know what you should mention, Darren, too, that we have a systematic approach when we are soliciting content from different individuals. I mean, I think you should speak to how we do that when we're soliciting content from our customers that we serve.
Yeah, I think it's the traditional pester approach. I mean, there's clever ways you can put together, like we used to put together a publicity manager, for some of our partners, where it was a web form where they would get an automated monthly prompt that would ask them for content. For other partners, we just do the emails and the calls, and it's just talking and constantly communicating with everybody and reminding everybody on the team or the extended team, we need information from you guys. Now, not everything that's submitted or said is used. You need to go back to the team during your regular calls and kind of have that discussion and see how we can make it work if it is applicable. But yeah, it's just it's like marketing for your marketing plan or your content plan. It's repetition, right? It's just reaching out on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think that ties nicely into this next piece of it, which is communicate. When you're getting started, over communication is the key. And I stole that catchphrase from Darren specifically for this webinar. But you want to make sure as you're ramping up content production that you are checking in regularly. Maybe that starts out as a weekly check-in just to see, if you're meeting due dates, if the topics are still relevant, if you're, to check in on the progress that you're starting to make. But as time goes, you want to make sure that you're also creating new ideas and reviewing the results of any content pieces that you've created. Like, is there a particular article or social post that's seeing a lot of engagement, that's driving a lot of web traffic and maybe even driving leads? Maybe that's something that you should come back to. Maybe there's a different campaign that you can create around that same topic or a different angle to kind of take that on with. So you can eventually space it out if you'd like, or if it makes more sense along the line to become monthly or quarterly, but really making sure to stay on top of it and keep stating the importance and reinforcing the importance of content check-ins at the beginning is what really can get it to, get that content to take root and get off the ground.
That third bullet resonates well with me, having to juggle so many initiatives. I think you do have to have a systematic approach to, developing content and communicating, because what systems do, it helps limited resources to do some extraordinary things predictably. And when you don't have a systematic approach, the randomness and the frenetic nature of our environment makes it hard for you to measure, to monitor, even quality control. So if you do have limited resources and you're like, man, this is just so overwhelming, what do I do? You want to create a system. Okay, what can I do with what I have? And even communicating with other stakeholders will get buy-in to developing that. So that's just, for me, systems are just crucial,
Yep. Yeah, and really, as with any plan or strategy, the strategy is only as good as the follow-up, and communication is a good way to make sure that your follow-up is strong and your follow-through is strong. In terms of figuring out what successful pieces of content or what successful content campaigns look like, this should kind of go all the way back to the marketing strategy. So when you're putting together plans for either a campaign or maybe a strategy across an entire calendar year, you're trying to hit some specific benchmarks or key performance indicators. And what are those? There are some that are specific to content, but there are also some that kind of tie into the rest of your marketing objectives. Some of the ones that are specific to content, like engagements or views, those are awesome, and those are great to show that those pieces are working, or maybe in a comparative sense, show that some pieces of content are working better than others. But how is it really pushing the overall objectives of your marketing plan?
Thank you, Sean. I'll take it from here. No, so it's
Mr. Marketing Director, Stephen.
Yeah, no, it's just like any marketing program. You have to begin with the end in mind. So to think about analytics, what you're looking at is the story of the customer's journey, right? And the key here is you're using your content to influence their decision making. I mean, when you boil it down to this, quintessential value is that you want to influence the decision. And so when you, in the beginning, you set these objectives, hey, I want to achieve, this quantity of impressions because it's going to yield this result, which is telling me that I'm influencing or engaging, or I have, generated X leads, which is going to lead to a sale or a relationship with that buyer, whatever stage they are on that journey. So success starts by creating in the beginning what the end result will look like and why that's of value to you. Now, that means that quantitatively speaking, there are some numbers that cannot capture the experience of the customer because qualitatively speaking, like Darren said, impressions over time is a value input. The customer is looking for education about a certain technology. You consistently deploy that communication. Then next thing you know, the customer that you didn't know anything about all of a sudden decides, hey, I want to patronize your business, right? That can't always be quantified, right? Immediately. But
yeah, neither can your thought leadership or expertise position. And I think that's something that you can establish, throughout any platform. And that's something that's really hard to, like you said, that's something that's hard to quantify, but it's certainly, raising your brand standard and message is certainly a huge part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, put it this way, you don't want to not do it because you say, I can't measure this. It's like I'm married, right? I be romantic on a consistent basis. I don't look at data to see, is this working? Well, stop being romantic. You'll find out if it's working or not, right? So thought leadership is a good example of that. Like you want to get in their head that you value them by delivering content consistently. So I say that because sometimes, from the investment standpoint, it's looked at as just dollars and cents. It's like, no, this is psychology, okay? In addition to the technology, it's psychology, it's human interaction that we're looking for.
I have always thought of content as a healthy romantic relationship.
Well, you're young. If you've been married as long as I have, you'll find out. It gets cold at night if you be unromantic. You get my point? Okay.
Well, not to get too far off the path, but yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think there are tangible measurements and intangible measurements. And one thing that I don't want to miss the point on here is that there are on-platform metrics. So like I said before, views, impressions, engagements, but how is that driving interaction with other pieces? So if you're putting out a social media post that's promoting a recent article or case study you had, how is that driving, views? How is that driving backlinking and clicking through the website? How is that constant content production promoting SEO results and, boosting your brand's way up the Google search ranking? So yeah, there's a lot of background cultivation that content does. So the results that you see above the surface are not as evident as the results that may go away if you stop doing it altogether or do a haphazard job of it. So with a calendar, it's good to have that plan and it's good to have that set in place. But Stephen's brought this up a couple of times on this webinar, focusing on agile marketing, and you have to have that as part of your strategy. You can't know the unknowable or what is going to happen in terms of industry trends or nationwide global crises like we're living through right now. There are a lot of factors that can kind of change your outlook. So don't be afraid of that. Make sure you take that head on and make sure that going into content production and calendar creation that that is going to be the one constant factor, is that you're going to have to face change, whether that's changing your own strategy to pivot towards what is working better or what is driving better results, or whether that's external feedback or external impetus where you're seeing maybe there's a crisis or there's a communication crisis and there's something that you need to jump on and take advantage of or address or alleviate in that exact moment.
Yeah, I think obviously the biggest example of this is what we're currently in with the pandemic with COVID. If you look at the content calendars that we were developing and managing at the beginning of the year and even into March, they look very different than they do right now. And not only does it change your calendar, but it should change your messaging, and you should adapt how you're being presented in the market. If there's something serious going on in your market, it doesn't hurt to pause it for a little bit, or maybe have some empathetic posts or empathetic content that you create to be aware of what's going on. But coming, kind of ignoring, the reality and the, what's going on in your market and just posting salesy type posts and pushing sales really can turn people off. So yeah, the biggest example that I've ever been through on changing your content calendars is this year right now. So we'll probably hopefully have no bigger example of of the need to adapt and change.
And I just say this: the key to adaptation is you really need to have people who are good at predictive analytics, because the goal is to be able to adapt and change before it happens. And obviously, we couldn't predict in the context of COVID-19 is be empathetic. Now your narratives need to predict, here's what the response would be in this context. Let's deploy content that hits our customers' needs. That's the name of this game, is you're really trying to resonate with human behavior through your communication tactics.
And part of this fearlessness against change is don't be afraid to get hurt again. Start planning for next year now. I know this year all of our 2020 plans, personal and professional, were thrown for a bit of a loop, but really the biggest part of that was resiliency and was having a plan in the first place. So we could pull from the pieces of the plan that were still relevant and use those to create content pieces that might be relevant in our new normal, or that we could use as we started to forge a path ahead and get back to a more normal marketing structure. So the battle for next year and winning next year's content and seeing great results starts right now. Use the end of Q3 and the duration of Q4 to plan for 2021. Get everybody on board, get your engineers, your technical folks, everyone outside the marketing department, or at least a representative from all the other departments, and start talking with them about ideas. See what you can create, see what is relevant or what's coming, or maybe what's a pressing concern for a specific application or industry that you weren't aware of. It's great to be open and to open your ears and your email inboxes for that kind of input, so you can wrap that up into how you plan for the next year and how you plan to create that content. So if that's,
I have one plan for my customers. I tell them, plan to win. That's what we're going to do. We're going to plan to win. Okay, and winners don't quit. Winners don't back out. They don't tap out. They don't give up. And so they do the things that brought them through a crisis, and they do the things that help their customers to get through it. And sometimes that's unknown, but there are some best practices And so you don't want to deviate from the standards of excellence, but you should, as soon as you can, as soon as you have a strategic direction, you want to build on that and into the future.
I think that's a great call to action, Stephen. I think that's a great way to kind of tie this piece up. So we really appreciate everyone's time, and we can kind of go through any questions that you all have about creating content, or what kinds of content, how to execute it, how to pull topics, any of the things that we've discussed today, or just any of your content curiosities. I see that we do have at least one serious question in our question box here. Jamie, thank you for providing us something that wasn't a comment on Darren's posture or.
Oh no, am I not sitting up?
No, I'm just there were just a couple comments on Darren. He was the most popular presenter today. But
So handsome.
Jamie, with an actually relevant question here, how frequently should I evaluate my content and make changes to the plan? Jamie, I would say every day that you can, every waking second that you can. More realistically, I think these items should be integrated into your regular meetings, your regular check-ins. So if you're having a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting, that's obviously a great time to bring that up. But if you're launching a campaign and you want to see how that's doing in the moment, you should check as frequently as you can. I would say with the amount of content campaigns that we have running right now, with all the needs to pivot and create virtual experiences and how those have kind of all launched over the last couple of months, I check in on those things at least once a week just to get at least a general sense of how they're doing, or a general sense of our social ad spend, or our views on our blog posts. I'm making sure to see what kind of results we're getting for those just about every day, or at least every week. So as much as often, I know that's not a terribly specific answer, but you want to make it as frequently as often. And if I would say the biggest thing is, how often should you be reporting those? You should make sure to check in with your team at least once a month to see how everything is working and how any content pieces are working in in conjunction with each other.
So there's a few things with that. There's obviously listening, which is real time, as you stated, because you're looking for opportunities and trends that happen according to the market conditions and the engagement with the user, right? Some platforms, the engagement is constant. And then there's also analysis, and some things have to mature, and it takes time depending on the cycle of the campaign. And in order to get the data to look back, because sometimes you're looking back in time, so it depends on that cycle of maturation. And then, as you mentioned, there's reporting. So campaigns have a shelf life, they have an end game, so it's predicated on the campaign duration. So it's a combination of things, but it just depends on the context.
Sorry about that noise, Stephen. That was me.
Oh, I thought I enjoyed that. I thought you were just kind of giving me some background music.
And
cool.
Jamie, after this call, you do have my contact information if you want to reach out for any further analysis or insight. But does anyone else have any particular questions, or for my panelists, do you have any particular words of wisdom to share as we kind of wrap this up?
I would just say, if anybody listening, if you guys have any feedback for us, we're all ears. We always are open to positive feedback. Negative feedback we'll definitely take into consideration, but any type of feedback's great. I think if you see any gaps, if you see any areas that you think we should expand on, or cover less, just let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, Darren, too. Some of these things, obviously, there's some things when we're speaking to our external audience we will not do. But I think, though, this was a practice run, and we prepared a couple of times, but we are looking for opportunities to improve, because we want to attract our external audience to, our philosophy and our brand of developing content. So and that impacts all of us. So take that into consideration. I like what Darren said, even negative. We won't listen to anything bad. No, I'm joking. We'll take it all in.
Yeah.
No, but
Any
we,
other questions, John? Did we get any other questions?
it looks like that was about it. We did see, oh, Jamie did thank me for our thoughtful reply. Darren, there were a couple pieces of feedback that you look out of place without a beard, but Eric is not sure that you can grow one.
This is the closest thing I have. This is
Oh, now he's digging.
empty though. It's a bummer.
Well, yeah,
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
well, yeah, we appreciate that kind of feedback as well. But yeah, we appreciate everyone's time and joining us today. I know a lot of this is more externally focused, but I think the processes that we've put together here, especially the communication and success measurements, can contribute to any kind of ongoing client service. So we hope you found some relevant pieces in it. And again, please reach out with any feedback or questions to Darren and Stephen specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.